Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turn Wheel. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it... that's the wrong intro. We're looking at Joshua, Natasha, and Myrrh from Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. Few characters that didn't really fit in anywhere better, especially Joshua and Myrrh. Natasha I could have put in with the Grotto characters, I guess, but these three, felt like mostly outliers. So I decided to lump them together. Obviously, Joshua and Natasha have some significance together as well, with their interactions in the story. So that's my justification. And then in terms of, we only have three characters this time around, and I don't have a lot to say about any of them. So this might end up being a very short episode. We'll see how it plays out. But, this might be one of the shorter SSS episodes so far. I guess we'll see. Okay, so we're going to start off with Joshua, and Joshua has the highest number of supports out of these characters. He supports with Natasha, Inez, Archer, La Rochelle, Marissa, and Garrick. Now, I feel like I owe Joshua something of an apology. These supports didn't exactly change my opinion on him or anything. I already liked Joshua, but I do know that the most I've talked about Joshua in the past was in the episode where, his sort of plot involvement gets resolved, with, him being there for Ismael dying in Erica route. And I feel like I was pretty negative towards Joshua in that episode. And I do stand by everything that I said. But I really want to make sure that it's clear that I do like Joshua. I think Joshua is a great character. And if we look at him in regards to, his role as, just another side character, then I think he's actually one of the better ones in the entire game. These supports are all really strong. I just think that his plot, his involvement in the main plot was a little bit half-hearted and half-baked. I don't think that was handled particularly well. But as far as his character goes, I think he's great. And these supports, honestly, reading through these supports really validated for me the way that I decided to do these, to structure these episodes, right? Where I focus on, because if you look at a character like Joshua and those supports that I just read off, I've already done most of these supports, right? I've already read the Archer one, I've already read the La Rochelle one, the Marissa one, and the Garrick one. The only ones that were new to me were Inez and Natasha, because I haven't done either of their episodes yet. But I see four of these supports, right? And in a vacuum, especially, split across multiple episodes, they don't really stick out to me at all, because I'm not really getting the full context on them. But looking at Joshua as a whole, reading through all of his supports and seeing them, even though they're the same supports, seeing them all in a row like this and seeing how they compare and contrast to each other, I think really does add a lot to my understanding of certain characters in these games. Not all of them, it's not like it's made a big difference for any other characters or for every single other character at least. But Joshua is one of the standout examples, I think, where we're looking at all of these back to back. Really, you do start to see the patterns, and start to get a better idea of what his deal is. And really, what it comes down to, at least in my opinion, is that Joshua just likes fucking with people. That is really the primary motivator for a lot of his behavior in these supports, is that he just really likes being a dick. And screwing with people's heads. And it's very funny. Obviously, a very consistent through line in his supports. We saw it with La Rochelle, Inez. We're about to see it with Inez. It happens with Garrick and with Archer. Is that he cheats. He loves to cheat in gambling. And the different ways that the characters react to that and bounce off of that is very fun. The way that he responds to each of the characters when they either, eventually see through his ruse or in the case of Archer, if they don't see through his ruse, or Inez actually also doesn't see through the cheating. I think it's very characterful for Joshua. So let's just go in one at a time, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them in turn. So the Natasha support, the gambling doesn't actually come up in this one very much. It comes up a little bit with him, honestly, being kind of having some cheesy pickup lines, where he's like, I bet that I can make you fall in love with me, or something like that. And normally I would roll my eyes, but I do think that this is a cute dynamic for them because Natasha's into it. Like Natasha is very much like reciprocating this. She also seems to have a thing for Joshua. So the fact that he's like laying it on a little bit thick here, I think works for me. Because it's easy to read that as like, there's chemistry between them, and he's just kind of like flirting, and she's responding in kind, right? Like if this was, basically any other like womanizer character that we see in the series, which Joshua isn't really that, because it doesn't come up in any of his other supports really. But if Joshua was like Sane or Gatry and he was using these lines, I'd be like, oh, what a loser. But I think the fact that Natasha and he clearly have this relationship where he feels comfortable doing that, I think is cute. I actually really buy into these two as a pairing. They do have a romantic paired ending, and I like them together. I think they make a cute couple. It's like in terms of the actual content of the support, it's just him complimenting her and the C support. B support, he helps her out of a tough situation, and they flirt a little bit. And then A support is basically them just kind of like confessing their feelings to each other. And I don't think it does a lot for either of them as characters, but I like that it's here because I think that it especially for Natasha, I think it does bring out a side to her that we don't see very often. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually get to Natasha, I suppose. But it's a nice dynamic between the two of them, and I'm a big fan. The Inez support is very funny, and I like this one for Inez a lot. We're gonna get into that at a later time because Inez is gonna be in the next SSS episode. But Joshua essentially, makes a bet with Inez, and steals a bunch of Inez's money. But Inez is completely undeterred, and he just keeps making bets with Joshua over and over and over and over again. And eventually he loses so much of his money that Joshua starts to, but like is still determined to keep going. Joshua takes pity on him and tells him the truth, which is that he'd been cheating. But then even after Inez figures out what's going on, after he's told, he wants to continue betting because he's got that fierce competitive streak in him. I mean, we know this about Inez. He's extremely competitive with Ephraim, for example. So him not wanting to end on a losing streak is very in character for him. What I find very funny is that, and this doesn't like mean anything. I don't think it like says anything about their characters necessarily, but I think it's a fun detail that in the Inez support, when they're doing bets over and over and over again, Inez is calling tails every single time. It's always tails, always tails. And then in the La Rochelle support, which we're going to talk about next, La Rochelle's calling heads every single time, and she's winning constantly, even though Joshua is rigging and fixing the bets. She's still managing to win somehow. I think it shows, and the same thing happens with Archer too, where Archer keeps losing, and eventually Joshua feels bad and tells the truth that he's been rigging the bets. Because I like that because I think it shows that, even though Joshua does like fucking with people, he's not like actively going out of his way to take advantage for the most part. He even offers to give Inez his money back, and he's not betting for money with Archer at all. So he's not like trying to actively like go out of his way to hurt people. I think he's just doing it because he's bored. Which is very in line with some of the stuff we're going to see from him later. The La Rochelle support is pretty straightforward. I don't have much to say about it. I think it's very funny for La Rochelle that she just gets addicted to gambling. But for Joshua's end of things, I don't think. I mean, I do think it's funny that she manages to be so ungodly, or I guess so godly lucky that she convinces Joshua to. I mean, it doesn't seem like he's stopped gambling or anything like that. He basically says, "Fuck it, I'm done," and throws up his hands and just gives up, which is pretty good. His Marissa support does an interesting job of I don't really like his I skipped one. Wait, which one did I skip? Oh, Archer. Yeah, Archer's not like particularly interesting. I mean, I think it, similarly to Inez, it just goes to show that Joshua isn't like a terrible person, even though he does enjoy being kind of an asshole sometimes. The Marissa support, I don't care that much for Marissa, and it's interesting to see the two like bond over. I don't really know what they're bonding over. I think the implication that we're supposed to be getting is that Marissa and Joshua are able to hit it off so well, because they're both people who have like hyperfixations, and like everything else in life just fills them with boredom. So in order to keep things interesting, they both need to spice up their lives. And for Marissa, it's by fighting, and for Joshua, it's by gambling. We do find out here, his backstory related to gambling. I guess he gives his like motivation for gambling. Yeah, okay. So he says, Joshua says, "You live for the sword, eh? I prefer rolling the dice to swinging the sword, you know." And Marissa says, "Why is that?" And Joshua says, "Phew, I thought you'd never ask. You're asking how I got hooked on gambling, right? Let me see. There's not much to tell. I guess by the time I realized it was already too late. I'd grown bored of everything before I discovered gambling. But then I saw it. Gambling was like life in short little bursts. Life itself is just one big gamble. That's how I see things." Which is, it's very funny. How he is not only willing but seemingly eager to give this backstory, or give this explanation for why he loves gambling so much. And there is another place, I think it's in his Garrick support, where he outright also asks, he says, Garrick says, "But tell me, why do you like gambling so much?" Where he just like doesn't give an answer. So I'm not sure what it is about specifically Marissa that makes him so willing to open up about this. But I think it's funny, especially like his description. He's like, this is the most passion we see Joshua give anything in any of his dialogue, including like his dying mother in his arms and his relationship with Natasha. We never see him more emotionally invested in anything than he is when he's talking about gambling. Yeah, I don't know. I think he's a fun character. The Garrick support doesn't add that much, honestly. Joshua again tries to cheat with Garrick, but this time Garrick sees through it, and calls Joshua out on it. And he's and the two of them develop a close friendship, where Joshua learns to really value his observantness and his craftiness, and asks Garrick to come to Johanna and like serve, as what does he say? Come work for me. And Garrick agrees to a duel to do so. And then in their paired ending, they apparently dueled, and it ended in a tie. But Garrick was so impressed by Joshua that he decided to go work for him anyway. Which is just a cool little relationship that they have. They're both very smart, very intelligent people. Both have been, have a lot of experience, and street smarts, I guess would be the right way to put it. And seeing the two of them bounce off each other like that, especially in comparison to characters like Archer or Inez, who Joshua is able to manipulate. As opposed to Garrick, who sees right through him, I think is really cool. But yeah, overall, I'm a pretty big fan of most of these supports. I felt like I was repeating myself a fair bit there, because I do think that a lot of these supports overlap and cover similar ground. So if it was kind of boring hearing me go through all those, I apologize. But I think they're all like well written and entertaining, and it is also important in the context of remembering that you're only going to see 1.5 of these per playthrough, unless you're reading them all, back to back on a wiki, which I think is both a negative and a positive, right? Because on the one hand, as I said, it can be really good seeing all these like lined up in a row here to see how they compare to each other. But on the other hand, when you're expected to only be able to see bits and pieces of these stories every time you play through the game, then places where it feels like they're treading the same ground over and over again isn't gonna be as tedious. So from that perspective, it's both an advantage and a disadvantage, I suppose. Okay, so next up we have Natasha, and Natasha supports with Joshua, Noel, Cormag, Seth, and Franz. Let's start with the Joshua support. I know we just did that one like a minute ago, but the thing that I like about the Joshua support from Natasha's point of view more so than the Joshua point of view, is that compared to Joshua, who's, you know, basically more or less like this all the time. You know, he's kind of laid back, suave, you know, swashbuckler type guy. So it doesn't really feel like stepping out of his pre-established character traits in the same way that it does for Natasha, where throughout the most of the rest of her support, she's very reserved. You know, she tends to be very fixated on other people. I mean, I don't want to say boring. That's maybe a little bit reductive, but it's definitely feels more like she is very prim and proper, anything outside of that usually, you know, is being initiated by somebody else, typically, you know, or for example Seth, because she and Seth also have a paired ending, where he basically approaches her and says, hey, I want you to come live with me after the war's over. Natasha, it does feel like some of that sort of cracks, and some of the more human aspects of her character are able to slip through a little bit here in the Joshua support, more so than they do in other places, I think. But when I say human, I mean, you know, like the fact that she's being flirted with here and seems to like it, you know, and has like a moment where she has to catch herself before admitting that she likes being around Joshua. And that's just cute, you know, like it's a level of schoolgirlishness that I think is like very endearing, and something that we just don't see from her in most of her other supports. So I like that aspect here. I don't think it does a lot for her character outside of that, but you know, I think it is it's still nice. It's still a nice moment between the two of them, and I think it does a good job of characterizing her in subtle ways, you know. I have talked about the Noel support in the past, and I've talked about how much I like it both for Natasha and for Noel. On Natasha's end of things, I do like how her perception of fate and holiness is being challenged by Noel here, who, you know, he's asking like, hey, if you could do something to save lives, but it might interfere with like God's plan or with, you know, the fate that's been predetermined for you, would you do that? Would you step over the line, and you know, because in Natasha's perspective, being able to see and alter the future is stepping into the domain of gods. But you know, she doesn't know whether she would have it in her to turn a blind eye to someone suffering if she could help them, even if it meant that she was maybe overstepping, you know, her bounds as a mortal. Which is such a cool concept, and I think it does a little bit more for Noel than it does for Natasha, in my opinion, but it's not by a lot. I think Natasha is really good in the support as well. I think it's because the answer that she comes to at the end is a little bit of a cop-out. I think if she had resolved one way or the other, you know, yes, I would change fate to help people, or no, I wouldn't change fate to help people, I think either of those would have been more characterful than what we actually got, which is, you know, Noel tells her about the earthquake, and she decides that she's going to use that knowledge to prepare, but like it's a situation that neither of them can do anything to stop, so she doesn't have to make a decision about whether she would, you know, do something to change fate if she could help it. I mean, I guess it is leaning more towards that she would, because she, you know, she's doing something that she might not otherwise have done if she didn't have this information. But I think it's a little bit less interesting than if she had if it was something more mundane that maybe she could do something about, like maybe she could like help evacuate people out of like a town that was going to be destroyed or something like that. I don't know. I think that would have been a little bit more interesting. But what we got is still very good. And I'm mostly nitpicking. Great support. Cormag, also the Cormag support also, you know, talks a lot about her desire to help people. I mean, that's really what Natasha boils down to as a character, right? She cares so much about helping people. She's so invested in helping people to sometimes her own detriment. And that comes up in a couple of her supports. Cormag, he and her just kind of like shoot the shit for a little bit about their families and Grotto and stuff like that. But then the conversation does kind of turn to well, we're both from Grotto, and under normal circumstances Natasha would be in Grotto helping the people of Grotto, and she doesn't want to hurt her countrymen, but at the same time she understands that Grotto is the one who initiated this conflict, and defeating Grotto is the only way that this is going to be resolved. So she's able to sort of find resolve in and understand that even though it may seem like she's doing harm to others, it is doing more to help people in the long term, which is a good conclusion to come to, obviously one that I agree with. I do think it would have been more interesting to see her struggle with that a little bit more, I think. But as it stands, it's more or less introduced and then immediately put to the side as like this doesn't really matter that much. That's how I felt about it anyway. I'm just going to breeze past these last two because I don't think they're particularly interesting. I think the Seth support is good because it establishes that she has some confidence issues, as well as at sometimes a complete disregard for her own safety if it means that she can help others. And she and Seth are able to go back and forth with each other over how they're both very reckless. They both go out of their ways to help people, and they bond over that a little bit. But it doesn't really go anywhere particularly interesting with the idea, so I'm mostly just gonna breeze past that. And then the Franz support, I wouldn't say does much for Natasha in general. I think it's nice to see that she is sort of praising and propping up Franz, who has his own confidence issues from time to time. So it's seeing her be so like kind and really like bring out the best in Franz, who has a lot of self-doubt. It's cute, and I like their dynamic a fair bit. I think I mentioned this in the Franz episode, but I do buy this as a romantic pairing more so than I do Seth. I don't think the Seth support really like leads into romance smoothly, and I'm not as big of a fan of that one as I am Joshua. But the Franz support isn't a paired ending, which is fine too. Like it's fine for for them to just be friends. Like that's totally okay. I'm just saying if they really wanted her to have a second paired ending, I would have preferred it to be with Franz than with Seth. But maybe that's just me. Okay. That's all for Natasha, and last but not least, we have Myrrh. And I mean, I say last but not least, but it is actually the least number of supports that we have this episode, possibly even the whole game, actually, because she only supports with 3 people. I can't think of anybody else that only supports with 3 people. There might be like 1 or 2 others, but it's pretty rare. Anyway, she supports with Sala, Dazla, and Ephraim, which it's pretty funny how in a character with only 3 supports, we still haven't even seen all of these because we haven't seen the Ephraim support yet. But we have seen Dazla and Sala, and I am just going to talk about the 2 of these in relation to each other because I think they have a fun distinction between them. Where in the Sala support, she very much, Sala is like heaping all this praise onto her, calling her, great dragon and talking all these really this really high praise of her. And Myrrh doesn't want that. Myrrh's just like, please just, treat me like you would anybody else. They talk about her father a little bit, and Myrrh, reflects on how her father has expressed to Myrrh that they can't be with either humans or monsters because they're not really fully one or the other. And in the end, the support resolves with Myrrh visiting Kyra Pelin and actually leaving Darkling Woods to live in Kyra Pelin. Which is, I think, a really nice ending for her. One of the only like good endings that she gets. I don't know what her unpaired ending is because she doesn't have a paired ending with Dazla. She does with both Ephraim and Sala. Where with Sala she moves to Kyra Pelin, and then with Ephraim she stays in Darkling Woods. But I think her paired ending is or her unpaired ending is. Yeah, she stays in Darkling Woods. And it seems like she is visited frequently by people, regardless of if she stays in Darkling Woods or not. She still gets, like, people to visit her and stuff like that. So it's not a completely tragic ending for her by any means, but I do like the paired ending in the Sala support where she goes to live in Kair Pelin. I think it's fun to see her come to terms with who she is, and then realize that just because she's a little bit different from humans, that doesn't mean that she has to be completely separate from them. I kind of question why Morva would tell her this. Like we don't get any characterization for Morva whatsoever. This is actually the most we get in the entire game. We know a little bit about him through like the backstory of the world, and he shows up in the story for like 5 minutes later on. So, maybe there's some more there that I'm forgetting about, but for the most part, we don't know much about him as a person or as a character. And I'm very curious, like, what his opinion is on humans, where he thinks that this is like to his daughter, who is effectively a child, telling her that she can never live with humans because she's different from them, and that they can never be fully accepted by humans. It kind of makes me think that Morva has more of a negative opinion on humans than the main story would let on, but I'm not actually 100% sure. I'll have to when we see Morva in the next main episode, I'll have to pay attention to his dialogue and see if I can glean anything that calls back to this support, but we'll see. The Dazla support, I know I said I was going to talk about the Sala and Dazla supports together. I kind of veered off there talking about the ending of the Sala support. But what I like about the Dazla support, especially in relation to the Sala support, is that in the Sala support, she's, very insistent, like, I don't want to be treated like this high authority, don't treat me more important or more special than anybody else. But in the Dazla support, where he doesn't realize that she isn't just a normal child, and is kind of talking to her like a child, she seems to get a little bit, annoyed by that. I mean, that's the impression that I get, where she's being very, quiet, she's not a very outspoken person, but from her mannerisms, it seems to me that she doesn't want to be treated as this high reverent being, but she also doesn't want to be talked down to as a child either, which feels very relatable, right? This is something that a lot of children do, right? Well, you said I'm 6, but I'm actually 6.5. Obviously, it's a little bit of a different situation, but it has that same energy to me, where even though Myrrh doesn't feel special or feel important, she's still also, she's trying to have it both ways, because she's also trying to say, well, I'm a dragon, I'm 1,200 years old, so, it's rude to ask a person their age. So I really wish that idea carried through to more of the support, and I might be reading too far into it. Maybe that's not even what was intended in the first place. But I think that is a fun read, and one that I think fits pretty well with what you do know about Myrrh, and about if it feels like a good piece of characterization for her, if that is in fact what the idea was. Instead, the Dazla support basically just has Dazla being fun and nice to her. And they have that fun line that I called out last time, where Dazla says, "You my dear are in love with Princess La Rochelle," which is pretty funny. So the support doesn't really do anything meaningful for either of them past the C support, I don't think. I mean, other than just Dazla being an absolute joy. I love this guy, but it's still fun. I still enjoyed reading it for sure. And finally, we have the Ephraim support. And I'll be honest, I'm not actually a big fan of this support, which maybe I could have structured this better so we didn't end on a negative note, but I actually really don't like this support. So it starts off with Myrrh and Ephraim, talking, and Myrrh asks if she can call Ephraim brother, and he says yes. And then he has a really funny line where he says, "Oh my, Erica, Myrrh, how can I say no to that look? I guess sisters are my weakness." Which is like, okay, I know I talked in one of the recent episodes about how I think the Erica and Ephraim shippers have no like textual evidence to go off of, and I still think that's true. I do have something to say about that. I'll save it for a later point, but I thought it was something that I forgot about that's pretty funny in retrospect. all I'm saying is that like I still think that's true. I still don't think there's any textual evidence here. But it's not okay. The game is could make it like less easy for them is all I'm gonna say, because the Ephraim does not need to go around throwing out lines like that and being really weird. But that's not really important. It's a fun dynamic that they have, or a cute dynamic that they have in the C support. But the main bread and butter here, I think, starts to come in the B support, where she says, I always had my father to watch over me when I slept. Can you please sleep, near me so that I can feel like I'm being watched over? And he says no, but you should go ask Erica to do it. And she says okay. And then in the ace support, Myrrh says, like they're talking about like what's going to happen after the war, and Myrrh says, oh well, I'm probably going to go to Darkling Woods, and Ephraim says, oh, maybe you should come live in Renee with us, and she says, maybe I'll think about it. And then let me read you the paired ending for these two, because it is really weird given how the ace support ends. After the war, Ephraim returned to Renee and Myrrh to Darkling Woods. They both turned their attention to their respective duties, but never forgot one another. Though Myrrh never again left Darkling Woods, Ephraim often visited her. So, like, not, she doesn't say, yes, Ephraim, I'm going to come to Renee with you. She is still, like, on the fence about it, it seems like. But it feels so weird. It feels like there's something missing here. And I did think about this a little bit. It feels like this is supposed to be a support about them coming to terms about Myrrh. Okay, I'm trying to think about how to word this. In the B support, and especially the B support, but also kind of the C support, it feels like Myrrh is acting like a child. She wants to call Ephraim brother. They say there is some. I glossed over some funny dialogue in the B support about how they joke a little bit about their respective ages and how her calling him big brother doesn't really work, and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. It's funny. You should go read it. But and then in the B support, Myrrh is obviously acting very childish by asking Ephraim to watch over her at night. And then I feel like it feels like they're setting something up there, right? Where Myrrh is, this important figure in the lives of a lot of people, and she does have a lot of very important duties, presumably, right? We don't know that much about what the Great Dragon does, but it seems like, especially based on other supports we've read, and on the main story, I think a couple of points it's been mentioned up to this point, that the Great Dragon is responsible for keeping the monsters in Darkling Woods in check, because those have always been a concern even before the Demon King started to come back. So it does seem like there is a certain level of importance to what Myrrh does, and what Morva does. So it feels like this could be setting up to be like a contrast to the Sala support, right? Where if she and Ephraim were, she was constantly, trying to act like this kid, or putting on this sort of, being more immature, being more childish around Ephraim, wanting Ephraim to like protect her and be her big brother and all that stuff. But then by the end of it, she decided, no, I need to like start living up to the responsibilities that I am going to find myself inheriting one day. And maybe she decides, she does want to be the Great Dragon. She doesn't want to just be this like any other person. She wants to be the people. She wants to be the person and the figure that the people of Caer Pelin look up to, and she wants to be worthy of that level of reverence. That could be really interesting, and it could be a cool way for her character to sort of go in two different directions based on who she supports with, which I'm always a big fan of. You guys know how I feel about that in regards to Ray from FE6 ended up being one of my favorite characters because it had the same deal going on, right? Where depending on who you supported him with, it felt like his character could move into different directions. And that's pretty cool. And I feel like they're kind of setting up for Myrrh to do the same thing, but it just feels like there's part of the ace support missing, where they never talk about that. That conclusion is never reached. So instead, it just feels like it's half finished, and then but the A support feels like it has such a sense of finality to it. I don't know. I think it's a little wonky, and I'm not sure why it's written this way. But yeah, if that was the intention, if that's how I was supposed to read it, then I feel like it definitely needed a little bit more time in the oven. Maybe I'm way off, and maybe they were trying to do something completely different, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. Well, I know that was a little bit more of a negative note to end on, but I also think that was the support in this entire episode with the most to chew on, because most of it was pretty a little bit on the dull side, a little bit in mostly straightforward without a whole lot of character interpretation to do in my opinion. So I guess that was a good hearty support to end off on. After all, but I think that's everything I have to say about these characters. I think my favorite out of the three is Joshua. I do like all three of these guys, and I don't think any of them are like amazing. Like none of these guys are like top tier Fire Emblem character for me personally. But I do think that Joshua is probably my favorite out of the three personally, which I think it's a very cool take. I think people really really like Joshua. Okay, that is all from me. And next time we're going to be doing everybody left in the game who isn't Erica or Ephraim, which if you've been keeping track, and you by process of elimination, you may have already figured out who it is. But it is going to be Tana, Inez, Cyrene, and Vanessa. So look forward to that. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.